First Things, episode number 66.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and you can't.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and it's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. So good to have you back with me today as we are continuing our study on Essentialism. We've been going through Greg McKeown's book, chapter by chapter, commenting on it, talking about how we can implement this in our lives. Today we are on chapter 14, which is entitled Limit, the Freedom of Setting Boundaries. Now, chapter 14 ends part 3 of the book. Part 3 of the book was about eliminate. How can we cut out the trivial many? So we've talked about clarifying. We've talked about daring to say no. We've talked about uncommit. We've talked about editing our lives. Today we're talking about limiting our lives, which may sound rather interesting. I thought the purpose was to not limit ourselves. Well, yes and no. Never limit your dreams, your imagination, your creativity. But setting boundaries for other people in your life can be very essential, to use that word. So we've covered part 1, which is the essence. What's the core mindset of an essentialist? We've talked about part 2, which was exploring how we discern the trivial many from the vital few. Part 3 is eliminating those trivial many things. And then starting next week, we will get into the last part of the book, which is execute, how we can make doing the vital few things almost effortless in our lives. Now, before we get started, as always, a few updates. So this week, we aren't talking about the survey anymore, but I do want to thank all of the people who did take that survey. In the end, I had 37 people take that. Greatly appreciate all of your responses. Thank you for communicating with me, emailing me, letting me know on Facebook about that. As I said to you in previous weeks, what I'm going to do is to take these data points, and sometime over the next few weeks, I'm going to look at them. Sometime probably in December, maybe early January, I'm going to tell you what you said. So even if you didn't take the survey, I'm going to tell you what people said in those survey responses. And I want to use that to make the show better. I want to emphasize the things that are working more. Here are some of the themes that maybe you want to hear us talk about on this show. And it isn't necessarily that this show is a democracy by any means, but it matters to me that I help and facilitate the people that are listening to me. So all of you who take your time, and thank you for that, to listen to me in this show, I want to feed back into your lives, and I want to give back in ways that really resonate with you the most. So you may not hear me talk about the survey for several weeks ahead of the time of this time. So don't worry about that if that's the case. I will come back around to it. And again, thank you for being so responsive to me in that. I think I finally caught up on all of the email of everyone who emailed me, including Jackie and Jen and Amanda as well. If for some reason someone wrote me and I did not write you and you're hearing this, then write me again. You can write me at me@brandonvaughn.com. And I would love to get to know you, hear what your thoughts are. If you have questions, comments, anything like that. But I think I've caught up on all email and responses. I think I have some discussion posts that have been posted into my website that I still need to answer, but I think I'm pretty caught up on everything. So as always, how am I doing in my essentials? Well, my writing has still continued to be very good, although the last few days I've been swamped with extra work, and it's usually been at night when I write. And I've told you before that when I do that, I'm not always as productive and do it as long. I have not written today yet. I'm recording the podcast right now. I plan to write after I record this podcast. Hoping to finish up this initial book idea, hopefully maybe by December, January. I have a lot of interest in writing. I want to write inspirational type books. I want to write fiction books. I want to write some productivity books. So I'm hoping after I kind of finish writing this more kind of inspirational type of thing, I'm going to turn my attention more to things like in this podcast. In fact, I'm thinking since I do a podcast over First Things that I might actually write a book about First Things and talk about the psychology of productivity, something I don't really see a lot of people doing. Music has been pretty good. Again, I haven't been doing it as much as I would like, but I've been pushing myself to do it at night. Still working on that one song, and I'm learning a lot, focusing on things I need to get in place to do other songs quicker. So I had this whole song ready to go. I was actually going to play it for you this week. Then I decided that I didn't like a few things that I did. And that may sound a bit perfectionistic, and maybe there's a tinge there of that. But for the most part, it was just the fact I wasn't using the tool properly. I was getting a decent sound and result, but I needed to go back and do it a different way that was actually much, much better. So I had to not start over again mixing it, but nearly that way. But maybe next week or the week after, I will play you that song if you care to hear it. And you may not even like it, like I said. If I ever do anything like that on this show, I will usually put it at the very end of the show. And if you don't like it, you can just turn it off. It's not going to hurt my feelings whatsoever. Sleep has been going pretty good, maybe a B. Eating and exercise, well, eating still is going good. Exercise has been doing better. I've made very diligent efforts this week to exercise. I only floundered a little bit this morning. Got up this morning with a little bit of a headache and thought it would go away by the time I exercised. Halfway through the exercise, it was still annoying me, so I actually kind of stopped short in my exercise regime for the day. But otherwise, it's been going a lot better. So let's get into our topic for today, which is over limits and boundaries. This is a very important topic for us to really get. Maybe another way to think of it is as margins in our lives. I've talked about the analogy of a margin. You think of a piece of paper that you would write or type on, or a book that you would pick up and read. How many times have you picked up a book in which the writing has gone from edge to edge, top and bottom? I've never seen a book like that, and anytime I've ever seen anything close to it, it makes me a little anxious because I like some white space on the margins. We have paper that we write on, and we usually don't cram it end to end with words. We leave some margins. We leave some white space. This is basically what we're dealing with today. And that whole thing of a margin isn't unique to me. There's a guy named Richard Swenson who wrote a book called Margin, Restoring Emotional, Physical, Financial, and Time Reserves to Overloaded Lives. And here's what he said about this. He says, margin is the space between our load and our limits. It's the amount allowed beyond that which is needed. It's something held in reserve for contingencies or unanticipated situations. Margin is the gap between rest and exhaustion, the space between breathing freely and suffocating. Margin is the opposite of overload. If we're overloaded, we have no margin. Most people are not quite sure when they pass from margin to overload. Threshold points are not easily measurable and are also different for different people in different circumstances. We don't want to be underachievers, heaven forbid, so we will fill our schedules uncritically. Options are as attractive as they are numerous, and we overbook. If we were equipped with a flashing light to indicate 100% full, we would better gauge our capacities, but we don't have such an indicator light, and we don't know when we've extended ourselves until we feel the pain. As a result, many people commit to 120% of life and wonder why the burdens feel so heavy. It's rare to see a life pre-scheduled to only 80%, leaving a margin for responding to the unexpected. Now, I don't know about you, but this is stuff I know and stuff I've continually had to relearn, because it seems like when I finally get this down, when I get into some sort of groove in my life and I have that margin back, then it's like this law of entropy. Little by little, things become more and more disorganized, things become more overbooked, until I'm overburdened again, and then I have to do it all over again. I have to come back to the fundamentals. I have to go back and relearn what I thought that I learned in the first place. So if you experience that, you're not alone. You know, I've told you many times in the past that some of our problems that we face, psychologically at least, is that we feel like I am abnormal. That when I look around at everyone else, it seems like they have their act together. It seems like they know what their purpose is. They know what their passions are. They have everything balanced. And then I look at my life and I feel overwhelmed. I don't feel like I know what's going on. I feel disconnected from things, and I think I'm abnormal. I think I'm weird. I think I'm strange. And I don't tell anyone this because they seem like they have their act together. So I'm fearful of saying anything or being found out as a fraud and a phony. So I keep it to myself, and I never have that luxury of really communicating this with other people. And if I did that, I would realize that they might actually be worse off than I am. They are at least in the same boat as I am. They just have a good facade about themselves. So if it seems like you get this and then 3 months down the road, it seems like you don't know any of this and you have to go back to square one, there's nothing wrong with you. I think that's just the way life is. I don't think you can put this on autopilot. I don't think you can just learn essentialism in however many weeks we've been studying this, and then it's just going to be default the rest of your life. I think you could be a black belt in essentialism, have a PhD in essentialism, and 3 months down the road, if you're not careful, you'll act as if you know nothing about essentialism. I think that's just the way life works. So we have to constantly come back, constantly push ourselves back to this, and not beat ourselves up over the fact that we're got back off tangent again. It's just life. We've got to just be committed to this regardless and learn from failures and move forward. Now, there's a lot of reasons why we get overburdened in life. Sometimes in work, there are cutbacks. We've had a lot of things going on with the economy in whatever part of the world you're in for the last 10 years or so. So things are tighter. There's less people. There are less demands sometimes. Therefore, more is expected of people. There's a lot of competition in the market. You have to be better at things than other people. So a lot of economy has to do with that. We said this last week. There's just a lot of technologies and gadgets out there that we've never had access to like we do today. A lot of distractions, a lot of things that will waste our time and our energies. Now, I love gadgets. I like them maybe too much, as I've said. They can suck away a lot of time out of our lives, and we've got to be very proactive with them. We were never taught in school. I don't think any of us were taught. I wish they would teach this in school right now. I wish any of you that listen to me that may be elementary, middle, high school teachers, I wish you would integrate this into schools and teach young people how to balance their lives and how to set boundaries, the very thing we're talking about today, to set margins in their life when it comes to gadgets and technologies. And parents as well. I'm a parent, and this is something that is a big challenge for me. It's a big challenge for me to say to my daughter to do it this particular way if I'm not demonstrating it, because me doing it speaks a lot louder than the words I tell her. The other reason why we lack margin in our lives often is due to fears. We've got a lot of fears about things that we really have to get beyond. At some point, we're going to do a whole series here about fear, but we fear that we're going to miss out on an opportunity. If we say no to something, it might never come back again. We fear that we're going to disappoint other people. We hate to tell people no. We like being a people pleaser. We like seeing their smile. It makes us feel good about ourselves. We don't like that frown. We don't like that sigh that people will give us, and therefore we will go out of our ways to not disappoint other people. We fear being left out, that others will be included and we won't. We fear being judged because of society's expectations, maybe someone else's expectations, like our friends, our families, maybe our own expectations that are way unrealistic, and we judge ourselves by those expectations. So setting boundaries in your life, setting margin in your life is not something that just happens. It is something you've got to fight for. You've got to be intentional about it. And you've got to constantly get up from failures and go back at it to realize that 3 months from now, 1 month from now, 1 week from now, 1 day from now, you may have drifted off course of this very thing. And the goal is to get back on course, not to condemn yourself, not to assume you don't know anything, not to just sit there for an extra day, week, month, year, doing nothing, but to get back onto course. It is a fight. And I think this is very helpful if we really realize this. This is a constant battle in your life, and you are going to be fighting this battle. Now, I know this is going to sound like terrible, bad news, but if you take it up as an adventure, as a journey, this is actually good news because you're going to waste a lot less time fighting yourself. This is just a battle we are going to fight from now until the day that we die. Life is constantly going to try to overwhelm us. Life is constantly going to try to cram our schedules full. We are going to allow that to happen because of various fears in our lives, and we've just got to constantly be on the alert, constantly diligent to these things. This is like anything in your life. You cannot expect, for instance, to be healthy if you're not going to eat healthy and exercise. You've got to be proactive in those things. It's the same thing with boundaries, with margins in your life. That isn't just going to happen in your life. I wish that you could go on autopilot, but you can't. That is a Disneyland version of life. It doesn't happen that way. And I would dare say that if you are on autopilot, it's very well likely you could be off course in your life. You may want to check that, but I doubt many of us would actually say that. The disappearance of margin in our lives, of boundaries, is the summary, if you will, of the non-essentialist. It is the era of the non-essentialist. we have blurred boundaries. We don't know the difference between work and family these days. Many of us don't have boundaries there. Some of us have blurred boundaries. I was just talking to a guy earlier this week. I emailed him, and an auto reply came back to say that he was out of office. And I thought, oh, good for him. I know that there's something coming up soon in the next month, and he should take some time off. It wasn't 30 minutes after I got that I got an email from him where he was stating that he was actually still working. And I'm sitting there thinking, why are you doing this? And I politely told him, I said, you need to make sure you take some time off for yourself. I don't really know this guy very well, so I didn't want to impose upon his life my philosophy of life. But these days, we just don't get boundaries. People expect so much more of us now, with especially like technology. Now that we have email, people expect us to always answer it, to always get it, to always be reading it, even if we happen to be off or on vacation or on the weekends. Greg says this in his book. The problem is not just that the boundaries have been blurred, it's that the boundary of work has edged insidiously into family territory. It is hard to imagine executives in most companies who would be comfortable with employees bringing their children to work on Monday morning, yet they seem to have no problem expecting their employees to come into the office or to work on a project on a Saturday or Sunday. See, here's a boundary that we need to establish in our lives. When are we going to be off from work? When are we going to separate ourselves from work to do other things? So maybe traditionally you work Monday through Friday. Well, if that's the case, do you work on Saturday or Sunday? If you do, you have no boundaries. You have no margins to say, okay, this is as far as I will go. But this day is a commitment that I'm going to spend with my family. So I'm sorry. I know you wanted me to work on this project today, but I cannot. Oh, I realize this project is important, but this is my only vacation. I cannot work on this project during this time. I have a boundary. I have a margin that's not flexible in this case. If we don't push back more on life, we will find ourselves losing the ability to choose what is the most essential things in our lives. So if I came to you and said, would you like to have less choice in your life and more things dictated to you, or would you like to have more freedom in your life to choose? I think most of us would say we would like to have more freedom to choose things. Well, ironically, not pushing back and establishing boundaries and margin in your life is actually giving you less choice in your life. It's locking you down more into things you don't want to be locked down into. So Greg says this, non-essentialists tend to think of boundaries as constraints or limits, things that get in the way of their hyper-productive life. To a non-essentialist, setting boundaries is evidence of weakness. If they are strong enough, they think they don't need boundaries. They can cope with it all. They can do it all. But without limits, they eventually become spread so thin that getting anything done becomes virtually impossible. Essentialists, on the other hand, see boundaries as empowering. They recognize that boundaries protect their time from being hijacked and often free them from the burden of having to say no to things that further others' objectives instead of their own. They know that clear boundaries allow them to proactively eliminate the demands and encumbrances from others that distract them from the true essentials. So a non-essentialist thinks that if you have limits, you will be limited. But an essentialist knows that if you have limits, you will become limitless. A non-essentialist sees boundaries as constraining, but an essentialist sees boundaries as liberating. Non-essentialist exerts effort attempting the direct no, but an essentialist sets rules in advance that eliminate the need for the direct no. So wow, those are some amazing points that Greg makes on that. In fact, you might want to even rewind this show for the last couple of minutes and listen to that again. Those were some powerful words that we really need to implement into our lives. So what are some strategies that we can use to put this into place? Well, first of all, some foundational things that we've got to remember. First of all, people's problems are not your problem. And that can sound strange, but I want you to think about this and think it through in your life. And I'm talking about even people that are your boss, people that are your family, people that may be your spouse, people that may be your parents or children, which is probably the hardest thing to apply this to. People's problems are their problem. They're not your problem. Now, you may volunteer to help them in their problem, but what many of us do is we absorb people's problems for them. We make their problem our problem. And we cannot rob people of their problems. Now, yes, I know we want to help people. I know that we want to serve people. We should serve and help people. As I've said many times before, that should be a choice. It should not be dictated to us. It should not be assumed upon us. It should not be a default thing. We should not play the victim mentality in life and just assume that's what we are. It is a choice made in freedom to do this for other people. Greg says this, I'm not saying we should never help people. We should serve and love and make a difference in the lives of others, of course. But when people make their problem our problem, we aren't helping them. We are enabling them. Once we take their problem for them, all we are doing is taking away their ability to solve it. I don't think it's any major news for me to tell you that you've got enough problems of your own than to try to take on anyone else's. I mean, is there anyone out there listening to me right now that says, Brandon, I've got about 40% of my life that's just free of problems and I can actually take on some more? Well, if you are, then let me know, because I think there's many people who are listening to me, including me, that will gladly give you some of my problems for you to deal with me instead of me having to do that. I don't think any of us will say that. We've got plenty enough problems in our own individual lives. We are all full up. There's no vacancy on our window. We just can't take on these things. But I want you to think about another thing about this. I've often said that we need to see our lives as an adventure, as a journey. Now, when we take people's problems from them, we rob people of their journey. We rob people of their adventure. Now, I'm not saying we can't be involved, we can't serve people, we can't help them, but we need to be careful that we just don't by default take people's problems from them and make them our problem. And it wasn't our problem before. A guy named Henry Cloud wrote a book called Boundaries. And in that book, he offered this analogy. Imagine that a neighbor never waters his lawn. But whenever you turn on your sprinkler system, because your sprinkler system is pointed incorrectly, the water shoots over on your neighbor's lawn. This is the neighbor that never waters his own lawn. You turn on your sprinkler system to water your lawn, but the water actually falls on your neighbor's lawn. Your grass ends up turning brown and dies. But your neighbor looks at his grass and it's all green. And he thinks to himself, wow, my yard is doing great. I don't have to do anything. In fact, I don't do anything. And look how wonderful my grass is. And oh, look at my neighbor's grass. It's all brown and dying. He needs to do something about that. Now, in that scenario, guess what? Everyone loses. Why? Because your efforts are being wasted. You're actually trying to do something with the resources you have, but instead of watering your own grass, you're letting your own grass die. And you are also enabling your neighbor for failure, because your neighbor never develops the habit of watering his own lawn. It ends up being that you are the one that waters his lawn. You are the one that has to do his work for him. You have to solve his problem, and guess what? You've never solved your own problem in the process. So what's the solution to that? Well, how about you just put some fences up to deal with the problem? You could fix your sprinkler, but if you don't fix your sprinkler, one way to do this would just to put some fences up that shoot the water back onto your grass instead of his. Fences will keep his problems out of your yard and keep his problems in his yard where they belong. Now, does that mean you can't help your neighbor? No, you can go over and say, hey, I notice your grass is kind of dying. Let me tell you what I do to help mine, or would you like for me to help you with yours? But you don't devote all of your energy meant to solve your problems to solve his. I thought that was a great analogy. We've got to realize, we've got to drill this in our head. In the world that we live in today, people are constantly trying to use your sprinklers to water their own grass. They're doing that all of the time. The only solution to this is to have boundaries, to have margin, to have fences, and to do that well in advance, not to wait until the request is made and then try to put up some fences. So you don't wait until you're on your vacation and then suddenly you have requests from your boss to attend meetings during your vacation, which I've had before, and then decide, this isn't right. This isn't good. I should say something. No, you should have thought about this way before, that there are boundaries in my life, and I'm going to keep those boundaries, and I'm going to keep my work separated from my family. And I'm not going to get up on Saturday morning and check my work email to see if anything came in. No, I'm going to wait. There is a boundary that I'm not going to cross. Boundaries are a source of liberation. I know that can sound kind of strange. How can a boundary be liberating? I said this last week. If you think about this, there is ultimate freedom when you work with inside of limitations. So the analogy I gave last week, if we say, isn't a car great? I can take this car and drive anywhere I want to. And there's truth in that. I can drive anywhere I want to. But when I work within the limitation of a highway or a road, then I truly can travel anywhere that I want to. But if I decide to go off of that road into some swamp area, then let's see how far I get in that freedom. I'm going to bog down in that swamp. If I see this mountain cliff and I think, oh wow, wouldn't it be great for me to drive off that cliff? Well, guess what's going to happen? Nothing very good is going to happen for me driving off a cliff. Now, I can do that in the name of freedom, but that freedom is going to bring a certain type of death into my life. When I am comfortable driving on limited roads that tell me how fast I can go and occasionally curves me a little bit to the left and occasionally curves me back to the right and occasionally I go up a hill and I go down a hill. When I'm comfortable living within that limitation, I can get in my car and I can drive to Los Angeles. I can drive to Oregon. I can drive to Washington, D.C. If I wanted to drive to London, well, then I have a limitation again. I can't just drive across the ocean unless I have some James Bond car. I can then fly. I can then put my car onto a boat, which is going to transport me over onto their roads. But limitations aren't an evil thing. Now, limitations I think are bad if you're limiting your dreams, if you are shortchanging your potential, shortchanging the potential of other people, if you are judging yourself, if you are shoulding on yourself, I should be this, I should do that. Those are the limitations we need to get rid of our lives. But boundaries and margins in our lives are a great thing and something we need to establish. What Greg mentions, and I think is a great thing, is to find your deal breakers. What are the things that you are simply going to refuse to say yes to unless they somehow overlap with other priorities or agendas in your life? There are certain things that are going to come into your life that is an automatic no. What are those things? What are the deal breakers for you? So for me, a deal breaker is working on my vacation. That is a deal breaker for me. I'm not going to do that. If I'm working on my vacation, then I'm not taking a vacation anymore. I'm not going to pretend to take a vacation and still do work. No, this is a break. And I'm learning to do that on my weekends. No, this is a time for me to spend with my family. This is a time for me to spend writing. This is a time to spend doing my music. This is a priority for me. Therefore, I'm going to set a boundary here. One way you could do this, also, if you don't know what those deal breakers are, is to write down any time you've gotten very upset by someone's request, where you feel violated, where you felt imposed upon in your life. When have you felt that? When has somebody asked you to do something and it really made you feel bad? It made you feel violated. It made you feel anxious, aggravated. I think we all can find instances in our lives of that. When have you felt that way? Those are your deal breakers. The reason why you were so aggravated is because it crossed into a deal breaker moment. Now, a couple of other quick suggestions that are not in the book. You need to recognize that your current load is unsustainable. You've got to tell yourself, look, this is crazy. I cannot maintain this workload. I've got to start pulling back. I've got to make some decisions about the commitments I'm going to keep moving forward, the way I'm going to use my time, the way I'm going to live my priorities out. This is not working and I have to do something. Just recognizing that you have limits, that you cannot be everything for everyone is a huge thing to know. Besides essentialism, just in general, that revelation is a major revelation in your life. We also have to simply acknowledge that often the real problem isn't other people and other things, it's really us. If we're honest, the problem isn't out there, the problem is right here. And I'm pointing at myself, and you should point at yourself. That's the problem. The reason I feel overwhelmed, the reason I sometimes feel like I'm on the verge of burnout, I can't blame anyone else. I'm the one saying yes to that. I'm the one that's not taking a vacation. I'm the one that's not setting boundaries and margin in my life. No one's holding a gun to my head. No one's forcing me to do these things. I'm the one who's saying yes. I'm the one that has these fears that we talked about that keep me from pushing away. And guess what? The good news is, since it is you, then you can change. You can change the way you respond to requests, to invitations, to the demands that come into your life. If it's your fault, you can change it. You can respond differently. That's good news. And the last thing I would suggest that you consider doing is to create your ideal week. I believe we talked about this on a previous episode, but again, margin and boundaries is not something, again, that just happens. You've got to fight for it. There's only 24 hours in a day. You're going to be sleeping, you should be sleeping about 7 to 8 hours of that, according to research. You've got to take some of your personal needs into consideration. So what's left over is a limited amount. It's not an elastic, flexible resource. It's very finite. And so what you should do, either on a piece of paper or in your mind, is to create what is an ideal week look for you. Think of it like a financial budget. You've got so much money in your bank. The only difference is you're planning how you will spend your time rather than your money. And you're planning that out ahead of time. So your ideal week is what you would live, what you would do if you could control 100% of what happens. Imagine your next week. You have 100% control over every single hour in that week. What does the ideal week look like? What would you be doing? When would you be doing it? You might even want to give themes for certain days. I've done that. This is a day I'm going to spend learning new things that can help me in my job. That's the theme for the day. This theme is I'm going to do a particular analysis. That's if I'm doing some type of job or I'm going to help teach or instruct something. Maybe you should theme a day. This is the day for this. That might help. But you should consider writing it down. You should consider thinking about it very seriously. This becomes your template for planning your next week. Your goal is to try to get as close to that ideal week as possible. Now, quite frankly, it's not possible to always get there, but you know what you're shooting for. You know what you're aiming for. And when you plan this out, you can plan in your margin. We said this in the Now Habits series. You need to schedule in there your recreation time. You need to schedule in there when you're exercising, when you're sleeping, when you're doing some fun things in your life. You've got to be proactive. This isn't going to happen by default. There is no app. I've looked at all sorts of apps that would do this for me. There aren't any because all those apps are meant for just general use. No one's written an app for me specifically. And I've got specific needs that an app just doesn't always meet. I've got to do this myself. I've got to be proactive in doing this. So I think on that note, we will end for today. So it's been great hanging with you guys. Thanks for hanging with me. Thanks for listening to me. And we will pick this up next week and start talking about really executing this and making this a priority in our lives. So I hope you've gained some stuff today. The big thing to take away from today, and what I want you to remember, is that if you and I are going to be effective over the long term, we have to create margin in our lives, boundaries. This is not optional. It's not a luxury. It's something we have to have in order to take care of ourselves and be healthy, have healthy relationships with our spouses, our children, our families, our coworkers, our companies, our businesses. We have to get that margin back in our lives and pace ourselves for the long term. Here's a question for you. Do you feel like you're out of margin? If so, what are you going to do about it this week? I'd love to hear from you. Write me at brandonvaughn.com. Let me know if you have some ideas or some things you want to mention about this. You can also go to my website, firstthingsproductivity.com/66. Leave me some comments about what you're going to do about margin in your life. So until next time, embrace today with passion and intention. And as always, do not die with your music still inside you.